So I am 23 years old. Um, I professionally am an audio engineer. Um, I have a couple of different hobbies. I like to play and write music. I'm a roller coaster enthusiast. I like to play video games a lot.
This is my second year at HEC as a theater performance major. I did theater in high school, but aside from that, this is kind of a fresh start for me, so it's really exciting.
I am a student at Harvard Community College. I am also a mom to 4 kids. I live in Bel Air, and I am a home daycare provider.
A little bit about me. I'm always very active. There's a lot that always goes on in my world. I'm a trainer at Planet Fitness now, so I do a bunch of classes, usually 8 hours on a stretch. Before I do that, I work out. If not that, I'm either hanging out with friends or I'm working on music. But aside from that, yeah, I just like to keep busy. I don't like being stuck doing nothing. My story is a bit different, but also, I guess, similar to many people. On my end, there was, oh goodness, probably October of 3.5 years ago. I was living in Colorado at the time, and I was hanging out with my friend Michaela. She had gotten fired from her job, but she went to go over there to pick up her last check. So I drove down there with her in her new car, and we went out there, and at the time, there was a few people that I knew at her job, or was then job. I would end up attracting one of the girls that was working there, and she happened to really like me. I liked her, and we just kind of hit it off really well. I remember our first date was getting my tattoo on my chest. It was actually really funny because I had honestly thought she was going to flake on me, but she didn't. And while we continued going on more dates and stuff like that, I got to really know her better. It's going to sound kind of late to the game, but her name was Devin, and she was a lot more than I thought she would ever be in my own personal life. She was someone that was always extremely stubborn, but at the same time, there wasn't really a lot of compassion going on in my world at that time frame, and so she kind of filled that void. Well, we kind of had a bit of a incident where we just kind of like stopped talking for a while, and then I ended up moving out here to Maryland, of course, so that kind of happened. But somehow, some way, we got in contact with each other again. At that point, I could tell that there was something special about her. So while we talked more and more, I just could not stop myself from falling head over heels for her. So knowing that that was going to happen, I made it official. We started dating, and I genuinely was at my happiest in my life at that point. There wasn't a single moment where I thought about not being there for her, whether it was in person, spiritually, anything. We didn't get to really talk as much as we used to over the phone just because I had a job that at that time I'd work from 7 o'clock at night to 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would do that from like 3 to 5 days back to back and never really had time to take off for my own self. So whenever I could get to talk to her, it was usually for a few minutes, either if I was on my lunch, or it would just be in the middle of the night when I basically would be awake. But at that point, I'd get tired, she'd be upset, and it just kind of kept happening like that. And all the while, for whatever reason, I couldn't see the signs that something was wrong.
I guess the majority of it kind of starts when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I remember for the majority of my life, I've always had really awful anxiety to the point where I couldn't get out of bed or leave my house. I couldn't go to school, and my parents kind of had to step in and take control over everything. And throughout all of elementary school and middle school, I was failing classes. I was missing countless amounts of days and actually ended up being hospitalized at Sheppard Pratt when I was 12 years old. I was there for about 5 days, but it was outpatient treatment. And then from there, I've had one other hospitalization when I was 18 years old. I went back to Sheppard Pratt. I was on the eating disorder unit, and I was inpatient for about a month. It should have been a month inpatient, but I got released early due to problems with my insurance, which obviously isn't fun. But I've been in recovery for bulimia for 2 years now, so yay me. But throughout that whole process, it's been a lot of ups and downs.
Back in like 8th grade, really, I started to struggle a lot with depression as well as with bullying. It was the reason that my parents actually pulled me out of private school, started to homeschool me. They thought that would help. It helped some for a little bit, and then it really didn't. At 14 years old, I was admitted to Shepherd Pratt, started seeing a psychologist, was diagnosed with major depression disorder. And really the most important thing for me getting through that has been just finding coping skills, things that help me to feel better about myself, and to just, sometimes forget what I'm going through.
She called me, and we were talking, and I could just tell something was wrong. And so finally, after being frustrated about it, I'd asked her, hey, what's going on? And she said, I think we need to take a break. And the moment she said that, I genuinely, for the first time, panicked. I'd never heard that. I'd never expected that to come from her, because prior to that, we had already been talking about me going out to buy her promise ring. I'd already showed my friends different ideas I had for her. She was supposed to come over for Christmas and all the other holidays that we're going to have, including going on a cruise together. And so it kind of threw me off balance, and I wasn't prepared for that. But I figured if it was going to help, keep the relationship going, I figured, you know what, why not? So I agreed to it, and, we decided once October hit, we would see where things were. I didn't realize at the time that it was because she had cheated on me that entire month leading up to it, and then at that point, she'd went back to the person she cheated with, which was her ex at that time. And I was completely left in the dark about that for a while. And so all that time I'd spent, just sitting there thinking to myself, wow, she's going to be down for me for everything. Thick and thin, we've already been through it all. That was my assumption. And then, of course, October 1st rolled by. She called me, and I told her everything I felt from day one. And she sat there and she said, well, I'm sorry, but I just don't feel the same way anymore. And then she hung up the phone. So I drove home, and I was, I couldn't say I was devastated, because I kind of was worse than that. I felt as if nothing was going on in the world anymore. So I got home about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and she called me again, and she said, hey, just to reiterate, it's over. And then in the background, I had heard the boyfriend's voice, and he sat there and was like, hey, hang up the phone. And then she hung up the phone. From the moment I left Colorado in June, she had been with him. And my friends knew the entire time, but did not say anything. So that put me about a good 2 months back into that spot again, where it was just nothing but anger and just drinking and a lot of other terrible decisions leading up to that. And then one day, it was spring semester here, and I don't know what happened. Something just came over me that was just like, you're good now.
My story would begin when my son was 9 years old, and he had a lot of weird symptoms in the fact that he had these headaches. He had weird, unexplainable pain different places, sometimes in his legs, sometimes in his back. There were a lot of weird things going on that as a mom, you sometimes aren't 100% sure of exactly what's wrong with your kid, but sometimes you're like, oh, maybe it's nothing. But when it persisted for a long period of time, I knew that it was probably something, just what that something was. So we saw a lot of different doctors. So we went to a regular doctor. She agreed with me that it was something, but we just couldn't quite put our finger on it. We went to a neurologist who said maybe he has migraines. Still wasn't completely getting better. We went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and they said maybe he has too large of adenoids, so we had those taken out. Still didn't get completely better. We went to a chiropractor who said this still doesn't really add up. He shouldn't still have these kind of unexplainable pains. So he suggested an orthopedist. We went to an orthopedist who told me that he maybe pulled a muscle or something, and that's why he had some weird pains. And at that moment, I kind of lost my cool. And I said, well, what if this isn't it? What if you're just blowing me off and this really, truly isn't it? And the doctor said, to make you feel better, I will give you an MRI, but you don't really need it, but I'll do this to make you feel better. So we had the MRI done, and then they called me and said that they saw something on the MRI, but they weren't sure it was anything. They really said, oh, it's probably nothing. It's just like a benign bone tumor, no big deal, but we're going to just do a little biopsy just to make sure it's still nothing. So then we had the bone biopsy done, and they called me and they said, I'm sorry that it's actually something, and it's this rare disease called Langerhans cell histiocytosis. You are going to need to see an oncologist. It's pretty bad, but whatever you do, don't Google it. So I Googled it because you do when someone tells you not to do something, your immediate reaction is, well, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it was pretty grim diagnosis. We were told that he would need surgery, chemotherapy, maybe radiation. The prognosis was pretty good as far as cancer diagnoses go, because with treatment it's fairly curable. But it still sucks as a mom to be told that your kid is sick. So that's kind of where we started.
One of the biggest negative coping skills in my life has been alcohol. And that was actually a struggle that I didn't start taking care of until more recently. I got to a point where I was drinking almost daily, just to numb struggles that I was going through, just to cope with them. And it got to the point where it started destroying things in my life, destroying relationships, not allowing me to properly function as a human being. I would miss work. I would do things that I would regret that would hurt people, and just keep telling myself that it was okay because when I drank, I felt better.
Oh, sure. I might have drank a little more wine than I should have. I 100% did. I think it's human nature to try to want to escape. So being a mom, like when Casey was around, I had to be like 100% positive and upbeat like 100% of the time when he was around. And then I cried in the shower because I didn't want him to hear me crying. Or I, felt the desire. I mean, I literally felt like I wanted to run away every moment of every day. Like I felt like I was crawling out of my skin because I just felt like I was faking it. Like I was faking it that I was okay. I was faking it that this was not that it wasn't a big deal. I just felt like to a point, maybe it was, that it wasn't a big deal to him. Like this is just a little thing. We're going to just do this little thing and then we're going to move on from it. Like that I made it seem like a short-term situation, even though I knew it was going to last a minimum of a year. We had a minimum of a year of chemotherapy, bare minimum. So I did kind of faked it till I maked it. Like, I mean, to a point, I guess I used a lot of like deflection. I just kind of put those feelings in a little drawer, and I closed that drawer as tight as I could and just tried to ignore them because I had to cope. I had to get through the situation.
Now, in terms of negative coping skills, which again, I would highly recommend you don't do this stuff, I drink a lot, whether it was on a cruise or if it was when I was coming or before that time frame. Shamefully, I will have to admit, I did a lot where I would hop from bar to bar, having drinks until I just could not feel anything, and then I just drive back home. I had zero fear of anything that would happen to me. It was probably the worst decision I've ever made. I also had a lot of flings, like not really healthy for that end there, but yeah. And it was just more of, part of it I honestly feel like was just because I didn't have it during the relationship, because again, it was a long distance thing. And the other part of it was just, it was there to make me at least feel like I was wanted.
A big part of the reason why the eating disorder ever started was it was a coping mechanism for depression and just generally not understanding myself as a person or my goals in life. When my OCD and my anxiety got really bad and my family fell apart, I turned to food. I could control how little I was eating. I could control how much I worked out, and it became a challenge to myself to, like, if I can't succeed in school, if I can't exceed socially or have friends, I can be the smallest person here. I can look the best. And that was my main focus. So the eating disorder is the center of my coping skills. And now I have to learn how to unteach myself on everything relating to coping mechanisms. So I'm finding new ones, trying to shed the eating disorder, which has its challenges, and I'm replacing it with any form of self-care I can get my hands on.
Well, the day they called to tell me that my son was sick, which is the worst way a parent could find out that their kid was sick, is to hear it over a phone call, I was actually in my front yard when I got the phone call, because I didn't want Casey to hear, and I have other kids, and so I legit collapsed on my front lawn and just sobbing and crying and like definitely having a why me moment. Why us? Why him? I called my primary doctor, and to this day I'm not even sure how it worked out this way. I called the office, and normally when you call a doctor's office you get like a secretary or something, and they take a voicemail or something like that. And I guess the lady could tell I was so hysterical. She actually put the doctor on the phone, and I told her what was going on, and she had said, okay, I've read about it in medical school. I've never seen anybody with it. I've never treated anybody with it, but I did read about it in medical school. I remember reading about it in medical school. That did not feel very comforting, but she stayed on the phone with me, and she did not hang up until my husband got home. And she's actually the one who called my husband and told him what was going on and told him he needed to leave work right away. And she stayed on the phone with me. And I remember thinking to myself, my husband works like almost an hour away, but she sat on the phone with me for at least over an hour. And I think to myself, all those times I sat in the waiting room in the doctor's office thinking to myself, why is she like so behind? I'll never get mad at a doctor ever again for me having to wait, because she might be on the phone with somebody like me losing their mind in the front yard. I started reaching out to people. I reached out to my doctor. I called my best friends. They all left work and they showed up at my house. I guess I kind of gathered a support system. I gathered people. Like, we called our parents. We called so Casey's grandparents. Like, our house was so full, and it reminds me a lot of what you see on TV, like on a TV show where people, like, there's like a crowd of people at at the hospital, or like a bad situation. And that's really truly what happened. We really did gather a support system, and literally gathered them in our living room as we had to sit down and we had to explain to Casey that he was sick. I mean, he knew he was, but he didn't feel sick. It was just a weird thing because he didn't really feel sick. He just had these things that were going on. We reached out to our church, at that point I started to get a little overwhelmed by the amount of people that were there, and we told the pastor not to come because I just felt like there were so many people at our house. And we really just turned to our support system. So my best friends, my husband's friends, our neighbor, you would have thought that like we were having a wedding, the amount of people that were at our house. But it really, I think for our family, the coping mechanism was that support, that actual physical need to have all these people there so that we didn't quite feel so alone in something that was really rare. I mean, it 1 in 100,000 people would get this, so it's not very common.
I think a big one for me is self-care and learning to accept the fact that it is okay for me to have setbacks. Not everyone is going to have a perfect recovery or a straightforward recovery. I've been all over the place. I have relapses and I have to go back to therapy. I'm not currently in therapy, so I'm kind of holding myself accountable every single day, making sure I'm following my meal plans, making sure I have to stay home from class if I need to sleep or I need to just breathe on my own. I clean a lot. Probably not the best coping mechanism since I do have OCD, but it does keep me feeling clean spiritually and emotionally speaking. I get very centered if I'm in a clean environment. So my room is fairly organized and I just really try to keep my environment as healthy as possible.
The most important thing for me getting through like depression and like moving on has been like finding coping skills, things that help me feel better about myself, things that help me sometimes just to forget what I'm struggling with. And one of the most important coping skills for me has been music. I've played piano since I was 4 years old, and when I was a teenager and struggling with depression, when I was in the worst part of it, really, I'd turn to music almost daily, just as a reprieve from everything I was going through, just as a distraction. Sometimes it was the only thing that made me happy, the only thing that made me feel good about myself. When I was 16, I started to write music a little bit more. Started to compose some classical pieces, as well as some songs in more modern styles. When I was 17, I started going to community college to take classes for music theory and composition, and that was a huge turning point in my life, and something that really helped to define who I am as a person. I had the biggest growth in my understanding of music and my understanding of what music meant to me during that period. I started to write a lot of music and use it as a way to channel my feelings into something other than anger and hurt and sadness. And it kind of helped me to develop into what I am today, because now I'm a professional audio engineer, and what led me to that was my appreciation of music and its meaning in my life.
I ended up finding out some good habits for me, the biggest one being working out. I realized that there was a lot of anger, stress, sadness, grief, that kind of stuff. I realized a lot of that could get burned off if I exercised. That way it would just push the focus away from everything else. And for the most part, I'd like to think that really did the trick for me. It helped to bring up my self-esteem, but it also helped, mentally keep everything in check for the most part. But another big thing that actually did help out, and I wish I would have done it earlier, was I actually listened to music intentionally made to make me sad, which sounds silly, but it's kind of what helped out. I realized that if I just let it out, if I just let out all that emotion, as quickly as humanly possible, without, causing too many issues, then I should be fine. And admittedly, yeah, it definitely hurt a lot. There was a lot of nights I just kind of sat in my car and just went and like screamed in anger, tears, and everything. But I knew that by the time either that song or that playlist ended, I was going to go back into the house and I'd be at least neutral. And then the other part I'd say is probably a bit more helpful on the positive end was my own family. My mom and my sister, they knew not to talk about everything that had happened. They knew that the best way of helping me out in that time frame was just to quietly be there for me, whether it would be just, leaving like a random muffin or a donut on the counter for me, or just to be like, hey, you look okay today, and then walk off. Stuff like that.
It sounds awful to say it, but there are moments where it feels like it helps. It makes you feel better. When it comes to any form of self-harm, the adrenaline release that you can feel from inflicting yourself with pain can sometimes be the only break you can get. So you rely on a different form of pain. If it's physical or emotional, you're hurting yourself more than whatever else was hurting you. And it becomes an addiction. You keep going until you can't go anymore.
In terms of accessibility, it's easier to do. It's easier to just go out there and have a drink rather than face your issues. But I also feel like it's easier because it's something that you see a lot. Whether it's, in real life, if you see it on TV, where it's usually in context as a joke, where you like see the cartoon character or some other person on a TV show just like drinking and then there's like laughing in the background. And so instinctively you'll probably think that like that's the best option, but reality, it's not. It's not really good health-wise, especially for your liver. It's not good just making those decisions. It took me a lot of time, but kind of realizing that now.
I think because alcohol was something that I didn't have to put effort into doing what I was doing. I could just pick up a bottle and drink. Music is still something that you have to consciously do, and so once you start doing it, it's much more satisfying, but you have to, and I guess for me it's easier to just pick up a bottle than it is to go over, to a piano and sit down and decide what to play or decide what I'm gonna write, or even get in my car and listen to music. It's easier to just pick up a bottle. It's right there.
When someone gets cancer, it's just not the person who gets sick that's affected. It's the whole family. I mean, Casey developed post-traumatic stress from everything he went through. And the most amazing thing to me, I had no idea, but when we told the doctor that Casey was having a very hard time, he was, crying and he was avoiding and didn't want to do things, and it was hard for him. But the doctor said to me that 80% of kids Casey's age, so he was 9 when he was diagnosed, at this point he was probably about 10, that they suffer from post-traumatic stress. I didn't know that. I just thought, like, you see videos like of St. Jude or even the Hopkins Children's Center, and you see the kids look happy. I mean, they look sick, but they look happy. They don't look sad. You don't see them cry. You don't see them not able to get out of bed. You don't see them so angry that they're throwing things because this is not fair. I can't go to my friend's birthday party because they're having a moon bounce and I'm not allowed to go on moon bounces because I have a tumor in my spine. You don't see that side. And I just didn't know the wide scoping area that it would cover, that it would be something that we would be dealing with, not just the cancer, that we would have to deal with this too, that how much it affected our entire family, just the way that we had to deal with things, the routines we had to establish. We had to start going to therapy, and then there was medication, and then there was hospitalizations specifically for the post-traumatic stress. And no one tells you that side of things. They tell you you're going to be sick. They tell you you're going to go through chemo. And I didn't realize that people who deal with that kind of thing, that any kind of cancer diagnosis, might actually also suffer from like an anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress. I just had no idea that was going to be part of it all.
I say my go-to at this point is exercising. As you've probably heard, that's a broken record here. I will, depending on my mood, even if it's a good day, I'll work out. But if it's a bad day, I'll typically work out longer just because I know it's more time for me to just be in my own little space. I know that if I go home, I don't want to have to worry anybody in the house about it, and I don't want to really worry any of my coworkers or anything like that. So it's a nice little way for me to essentially have like a little one-on-one with myself. And so I've learned that if I'm in the gym for, usually 3.5, 4 hours of just like absolutely going for it, that's usually a key indicator that there's something on my mind. But if not that, honestly, I'm singing in the car.
So, I think writing is a more specific thing. You don't always have to write music. Sometimes for me, the coping skill was just getting in my car and just sitting down. I didn't even have to drive anywhere. Just getting in my car to have my own space and sitting down and listening to music sometimes was what I used to cope. Sometimes, you just sit down, turn on classical music or rock or whatever you're feeling that day, and just allow yourself to focus on that and on nothing else. You use it as a distraction. Something that worked really well for me was like listening to classical music and making myself focus on the complexities of the music and trying to figure out what I was hearing, and that would help me to stop thinking about whatever was hurting at the time.
I have a little bag of stuff. I have a incense holder. I have lilac incense and also a sage stick. Part of my self-care is getting all of my sage and other incense. This is what I've been using lately, but I typically go for saging myself centered in front of one of my tables with other incense burning depending on what I need that day. And then I meditate with crystals. I'm wearing crystals right now. This is a clear quartz, and it's wrapped with the Tree of Life. And then I have Tiger's Eye, lapis lazuli, onyx, malaconite, smoky quartz, rose quartz, and amethyst. I also have a giant amethyst rock, which I put in the center of all my meditations. And it is something I do at the end of every day or the start of the day, depending on what I need. And it kind of brings me a sense of serenity and calmness and gives me a chance to reset and kind of find the will in myself to get through the day or to cleanse myself of whatever that day has brought me. So these are my go-tos. They're my buddies.
Casey having a support system as well as us having a support system, and they overlapped some, but they were different. I mean, he was 10. He had friends who still treated him like a 10-year-old. That was important to him because so much of his life changed. Like, he didn't get to go to school every Monday because he had to go for chemotherapy. He didn't get to go to those birthday parties that he wanted to go to because I swear that year, every single kid had a Moonbounce birthday party. I swear every kid, he got invited to a birthday party. It was a Moonbounce birthday party and he couldn't go. And it was little things, like he couldn't eat ice cream because ice cream machines apparently are very dirty. I didn't know this, so now I'm like weird when I eat. I don't eat soft syrup. Apparently, there's a lot of germs in those things. There was a lot of like little things that came up that made him just feel like, oh, this is one more thing I can't do. It's one more thing that reminds me of what I have. But having his friends that still like wanted to play video games or wanted to go to the movies or wanted to do those things and still made him feel like a kid was so important to him. Having that moment. Knowing that just because you're sick and you're going through cancer doesn't mean your mom's not going to punish you when you don't follow the rules. And having my friends there to let me cry, so I'm not just crying in the shower, and who, even when I say I'm okay, say, are you really okay? Are you sure you're really okay? Or just offering to help, even if it was just to watch the kids so I could have a moment to myself, or you know, showing up at the hospital even though I didn't ask for it, just to have somebody else there who could run and get something for us if we needed it, or you know, just people checking in and making sure we didn't feel alone was so important. I think that it helped us not only to cope as well as we did, but also to not have as so much of it is isolating, so much of it is lonely. I mean, case in point, we literally were in isolation in the hospital, and we knew we weren't alone because there were constantly people checking in on us.
I think one of the best things that music as a coping skill taught me, that any good coping skill should help you find, is self-worth.
It is okay to need help.
If you do have, you know, that kind of breakup, understand it's not the end. Understand that there's someone that's going to be out there for you. It could be family that's there for you. It could be, you know, potential love interest down the road. It could be, heck, it could be a puppy. It could be anything out there that can save you from that kind of pain. You just have to take a moment and step back, assess the situation, and then after that, find yourself. Don't be afraid to open up and feel what you're feeling. Don't bury it down inside, because eventually it's gonna come back up. So it's better to just get it out the way right then and there than to hold it in.
So I once said that there was this like why me moment, right? That very first moment on my front lawn where I said, why me, why us, why our family? And then as Casey went through treatment and we got ourselves into a little bit of a routine and a groove, I realized, why not us? Why not us because we have a strong support system? Why not us because we have really good insurance? Why not us because we have jobs that are flexible? Why not us because, you know, we have a strong foundation in our church or in our friendships? It better us than somebody who doesn't have those things, because I mean, I couldn't imagine having to go through it if I didn't have, you know, parents close by who could help watch our other kids, or stay with them when we had to go in the hospital, or a job that was somewhat flexible so that when I needed time off every single Monday to go to the hospital for them to get chemo, they understood, or, you know, an insurance, you know, that covered a lot of the bills, not all the bills, but it covered a lot of the bills. I can't imagine. I know how expensive it was. It's so expensive to have cancer. I couldn't imagine if we didn't have those kinds of things. So then I really think having that foundation, that support system, really helped us to get from why me to why not us.
Well, I am just this year, by Thanksgiving, I will be 5 years clean from self-harm. Yay, go me. 2 years into recovery for the eating disorder. I am a suicide attempt survivor. And I've seen so many of my friends go through this, and even complete strangers I met at the hospitals. The one advice I've always gotten from people, and I've given myself now, is, as cliche as it sounds, it gets better, it gets easier. Doesn't mean every day is going to be good. You're still going to have bad days, but that's completely okay and to be expected. But it's a process, but it's worth it. That was so much fun. I'm trying not to cry. The very first half, I was like, I'm gonna cry. I need to not.